Hello, and welcome to Dining with Death. This episode is on my playlist, Dining with the Departed, where we talk about famous or infamous people who have passed. We talk about their lives, their careers, what they're famous or infamous for, and then I show you and taste either their last meal or their favorite food. I'm Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Elizabeth II, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, was born on April 21st, 1926, to Prince Albert, Duke of York, who later became King George VI, and his wife, Elizabeth Bowes Lyon, Duchess of York, who later became Elizabeth the Queen Mother. She was born in Mayfair, London, England. Her father was the second son of King George V, and her mother was the youngest daughter of Scottish aristocrat Claude Bowes Lyon, 14th Earl of Strathmore and Kingham. Elizabeth was baptized by the Anglican Archbishop of York in Buckingham Palace on May 29th. Little Elizabeth had a special relationship with her grandfather, George V, whom she lovingly called Grandpa England, and the press loved to see little Elizabeth coming and going from the palace to visit her grandfather in his later years, especially when he was ailing. She had one sister, Princess Margaret, who was born in 1930, and the two princesses were educated at home under their mother's watchful eye, along with their governess, Marion Crawford. Winston Churchill described Elizabeth as a child, as a character, and others say she was a happy little girl, but well-behaved. Elizabeth was never expected to become queen. She was third in line of succession to the British throne. When her grandfather died in 1936, her uncle Edward VII abdicated because he wanted to marry a divorced socialite. Therefore, Elizabeth's father became the king, and Elizabeth became heir presumptive, next in line. She went to Eton College, where she became fluent in French, and she enrolled as a Sea Ranger, which is kind of like an older version of the Girl Scouts here in America. Elizabeth traveled the world with her parents, going to Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Her parents did not take her on some of their longer journeys, but they corresponded by writing letters. When the Second World War broke out, some felt the princesses should be evacuated to Canada to avoid the bombings in London. But Elizabeth's mother said, "The children won't go without me, I won't leave without the king, and the king will never leave." So the princesses stayed, and that's when Elizabeth began making radio broadcasts, still a child herself, to other children that were experiencing evacuations. This is a foreign world to us in America. We don't understand the nuances of the royal family. So I was a little hesitant to cover this in case I said something wrong or pronounced something wrong. But even though we don't understand that world very well, it's still very interesting. The thought of someone being born with their whole life planned out for them and absolutely, well, I shouldn't say absolutely, really no say in how their life is going to go is kind of sad to me. I'm sure other people feel that way. Many people feel they're very wealthy, so they're very privileged, and they are. I'm not saying that they aren't, but they're not very free from what I understand. Elizabeth joined the military service after she turned 18, and in 1945, she was appointed an honorary second subaltern in the Auxiliary Territorial Service. She worked as a driver and mechanic and was given the rank of Honorary Junior Commander. When the war ended and the people of London celebrated in the streets, Elizabeth and Margaret, the sisters, pleaded with their parents to let them go out. They dressed in street clothing and no one recognized them. Elizabeth later said, "I remember we were terrified of being recognized. I remember lines of unknown people linking arms and walking down Whitewall, all of us just swept along on a tide of happiness and relief." I guess that's kind of what I mean. They can't do normal things. They can't go out in public. I'm sure there are people that would want to hurt them, and they have to stay in disguise if they do. I don't know. I just don't know if I would trade all the wealth in the world for not being able to do what I want. I am not very good at being told I can't do something I want to do. From the time Elizabeth was 13 years old, she told people that she was in love with Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. She first met him in 1934 and then again in 1937. They were second cousins once removed, and after meeting for the third time at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth, they began exchanging letters. When Elizabeth turned 21, they announced their engagement on July 9, 1947. Elizabeth and Philip were married on November 20th, 1947 at Westminster Abbey. Their first child, Charles, was born in November of 1948. Their daughter, Princess Anne, was born in August of 1950. George VI's health began to decline in the early 1950s, and he died shortly thereafter. Elizabeth chose to keep her name, and she became Elizabeth II. She and Philip moved into Buckingham Palace, and her coronation was held on June 2, 1953. She wore this beautiful gown embroidered with the floral emblems of the Commonwealth countries. Aren't these photos incredible? They're from the 1950s, but something about them seems much older. Now, we could talk for days about the politics of Queen Elizabeth, about the controversies, about her acts as queen and the decisions she made for the country. But I've decided to focus today on more details of who she was as a person, what she liked and disliked, and so we can all learn a little more about her as a woman. We have to remember, this was a woman who was born during the era of the silent films, and she saw the creation of modern technologies, the birth of rock and roll, the birth of the internet, of the cell phone, the smartphone. But not surprisingly, a lot of her tastes remained very old school. Some of Queen Elizabeth's favorite things are going to be exactly what you expect, and there are a couple in here that just blew my mind. She loved the song Oklahoma from the play of the same name. She loved the hymns Praise My Soul, The King of Heaven, and The Lord is My Shepherd. She also loved the songs Cheek to Cheek by Fred Astaire and The White Cliffs of Dover by Vera Lynn. Another of her favorites was Leaning on a Lamppost by George Formby. But the thing I love most is the fact that the Queen herself had a secret love of the song Dancing Queen by ABBA. Isn't that great? Like, there's just something so funny about that to me. The Queen of England, like listening to Dancing Queen and doing, like a little old lady dance. Queen Elizabeth was a lover of art. She said her favorite painting was The Shipbuilder and His Wife, a 1633 masterpiece by Rembrandt. This is a breathtaking painting and one that has always moved me because there's kind of a sense of humor to it. And we know from people close to her that Queen Elizabeth did have a very good sense of humor, and this painting spoke to her. The shipbuilder's wife is kind of barging in to interrupt his work. Who knows what they're talking about? And we could talk all day about Rembrandt's skill with lighting. His paintings are just incredible. But Queen Elizabeth also loved artist David Hockney's work, which is a real departure from the classic artists like Rembrandt. David Hockney had a relationship with Queen Elizabeth and later in his life designed this stained glass window that was installed at Westminster Abbey. This is the part that I really could not believe. One of Queen Elizabeth's favorite films is the 1980s cult classic Flash Gordon. Now, that one really blew my mind. If you have not seen Flash Gordon, my friends, you are missing out. Let me tell you a story about Flash Gordon. One weekend a month, maybe two, my mom would take us to the video rental store and let us rent some movies. We rented Watcher in the Woods because I love all things scary, even when I was a little kid. It's like a scary Disney movie. And we would rent, who knows why my mom let us rent this, The Changeling. Now, my parents were super strict about what we watched, and I think my mom thought that because George C. Scott was in that movie, it was some sort of a classic. But it's a horror film, and it's still one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. Me and my sisters would be downstairs, huddled together, watching The Changeling. My mom probably thought we were watching something like Citizen Kane. But the other movie that we would rent is Flash Gordon. We rented that movie, I don't know how many times. I've seen it 100 times. I own it. I own Flash Gordon. It is like if drag queens and theater geeks and military people and opera singers got together and made a movie. The costumes are really crazy. It takes place in space, for starters. And the costumes are really elaborate. The set design is really elaborate. It's super, super campy. But the best part is that the soundtrack is by Queen, and there's just some incredible music in the movie. If you haven't seen the original Flash Gordon movie from the 80s, you've got to see it. I don't know if it's the original. Maybe there was one in the 70s or the 60s. I don't know. But the one from the 80s is the one I'm talking about. Fantastic. And there's a point in the movie where the bad guy grabs the ponytail of the main lady and he kind of yanks her head back and he looks at her and he says, "Lying bitch." And every time that part was coming up, we'd grab our little Beta remote control with the wheel. Remember those? and pause the tape so somebody could run up and turn the volume all the way down, because we knew if my mom heard that, she would never let us rent the movie again. But I love the movie, and I love the fact that Queen Elizabeth loved the movie. I was just so surprised by that. The Queen's favorite TV show was a police soap drama called The Bill. That went off the air in 2010, and then the Queen began watching Doctor Who and Downton Abbey, which I find so fascinating. One of her aides recently told the press that the Queen had a Netflix subscription, and she did, in fact, watch The Crown, but they wouldn't comment on the Queen's thoughts on it. Now, what did Queen Elizabeth dislike? She didn't like John Lennon. When the Beatles were taken to meet the Queen, John Lennon turned his back on the Queen, and he later said, "We received our royal medals for entertaining people, and royals get theirs for killing people. I think we deserve ours more." Apparently, this infuriated the Queen, and she had a real dislike for John Lennon. The Queen also hated the board game Monopoly. She hated it so much that it was completely banned from being played in the royal household. She didn't like the underlying themes of wealth distribution, and she also thought it caused people to argue. I think that's really telling of the way the Queen saw the world. She knew that there were people that didn't like the royals, and she knew there were people that thought they were spoiled and pretentious. But she also didn't really know the real world. I mean, she was born into this world, so she didn't know what it was like to be like us and, a normal person. But I find it very interesting that she hated Monopoly because of that. I've been showing a lot of photos of the Queen during her travels around the world. She was a well-liked and pleasant queen who became the longest reigning monarch in British history. We could touch on her issues with Princess Diana. We could talk about Camilla. There are a lot of things we could talk about. But for today, for our short little bio, I thought we'd keep it light and more personal. On September 8th, 2022, after a long life of service and dedication to the life she was born to live, Buckingham Palace released a statement. It said, "Following further evaluation this morning, the Queen's doctors are concerned for Her Majesty's health and have recommended she remain under medical supervision. The Queen remains comfortable and at Balmoral." Her family quickly gathered at her side, and later that day, Queen Elizabeth II died peacefully at the age of 96. Her two children, Charles and Anne, were by her side. Her official cause of death? Old age. What a way to go. What a life she led. What a totally and completely unique human experience she had. Her funeral was, of course, fit for a queen. People left tributes and tokens of appreciation, and the world mourned the loss of this iconic person who had been alive and part of our culture longer than just about anyone else. So, what was Queen Elizabeth's favorite food? I think you're going to get a kick out of this. Queen Elizabeth had quite a few favorite foods, and we're going to talk a little bit about those. But her very favorite thing in the world were jam pennies. What is a jam penny? It is a little round tea sandwich made of white bread, butter, and strawberry jam. She preferred strawberry. It has been reported that Queen Elizabeth ate these every single day of her 96 years. Well, there would be a year there or so where she couldn't eat solid food. 95 years or so, every single day she ate these. She also loved Earl Grey tea. I am a tea drinker. This is not the cup I usually use to drink my tea out of. This is a very old cup from my grandma's house, probably well over 150 years because her mother owned it as well. But I decided to use it because I thought it looked like something the Queen would drink out of. So let's taste our jam pennies and have a sip of Earl Grey tea in honor of the Queen. I mean, how is that just anything but totally and completely delicious and enjoyable? You've got bread, you've got butter, you've got jam, and you've got hot tea. I don't think there's anything better in the world. Ridiculously good. I'm just gonna finish it off. Apparently the queen also really loved scones with cream on them. There was a refrigerated cake that she really enjoyed. She ate Special K almost every morning for breakfast, or a piece of toast with marmalade jam on it. But there are a lot of reports that she had corgis, and a lot of people say her corgis usually got most of her breakfast. She was a light eater. I think she was someone who wanted to stay slender and, keep up appearances and look really good. Another reason I think that is because she never ate starch at dinner. She would always have either grilled fish or steamed fish or grilled chicken with vegetables. She wouldn't even eat like potatoes or rice or anything for dinner. And I think that's because she was, trying to stay slim. So if you want, have a jam penny and a cuppa in honor of the queen, one of the most iconic people for my generation, the generations before me, and the generations after me. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, Dining with the Departed. Hit the like button if you liked the video, subscribe to my channel if you want to support me, and you can also join my Patreon. Patreon is really keeping the channel alive at this point, and we have a goal there. In the end, our goal on Patreon is to raise money to donate to police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that cannot be tested because there's no money to test it. We want to help with that. We want to help solve some cold cases, and we want to get those perpetrators' DNA in the system because they might be linked to other cases. If you want to donate a couple bucks a month, that's great with me. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for being part of our community. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.